Harrison is an educator. Ms. Harrison is an educator, a consultant for schools on racial equity, a community organizer, a school board trustee, and more. She will share how the creation of Black student unions fosters community while helping to train and support emerging young leaders. With her sharing of knowledge, we will understand how to begin increasing Black student unions in New Mexico schools. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so very much. I am so pleased to be with you today and to share with you about the power of a Black student union and what that can mean for not only Black students, but really for an entire community. Have a presentation to share with you, and I know that we'll be discussing afterwards, which is going to be one of my favorite parts because I love dialogue, and I think that we can answer a lot of questions and also work to solve issues that may be barriers to starting a Black student union. So thank you for being here today, and I'm excited to share with you, learn with you, build with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Uh-oh, not that. Share my actual screen. Okay, so we'll be discussing starting a Black student union. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Ralph Ellison. And he says, "If you can show me how I can cling to that which is real to me, while teaching me a way into the larger society, then and only then will I drop my defenses and hostility, and I will sing your praises, and I will help make the desert bear fruit." And I believe that to be true of our Black children. When we're talking about education, when we're talking about their access to education, we know that there's been a lot of trauma for Black communities when dealing with public education. I think that there's this thought that Brown v. Board of Education and desegregating schools was the path to equity, but what we need to realize is that our Black students are taught by a lot of times people who don't look like them, and people who do not understand them, and people that do not always see and elevate their brilliance. So no matter the context, I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a moment, but I taught at a very suburban school. And so that context is that there were very few Black students. Even in that context, those students deserve to be seen and to be heard. And that's extremely important that we see them and that we allow them to show up in their full humanity while also teaching them a way into larger society. Uh-oh. Let me go back. So a little bit about me. I was a high school marketing teacher for 9 years and a 2-time teacher of the year, which, not to brag, I'm letting you know that because it allowed me to leverage some of my success to take some risks in schools pertaining to Black students, which we will talk about. I have a bachelor and an MBA from Baylor University. I didn't set out to become an educator. I never in a million years thought that this is what I would do. But also, I have never loved anything more than teaching. So I came into teaching by way of an alternative certification. I am an entrepreneur. I love and am passionate about design thinking and dance. I love building community and culture. And I went straight from the classroom onto the school board, where I'm now the vice president of the Round Rock ISD school board. And then in my spare time, some of the things I'm passionate about are racial equity for reparations and also food justice. So the way our Black student unions really came about was through student advocacy and through educator advocacy. So a personal story, when I first started teaching, I worked in a district, and I'm a school board member in a district that had 9% Black students district-wide, but 5% Black students on over 3,000 student campus. And so when I became a teacher, I had a lot of people say to me, it's going to be great to have a Black educator. And my history growing up was pretty a-racial. And now that I have learned and leaned into deconstructing that white supremacy culture within myself, I realized that nothing is ever a-racial, right? And so people said, it's going to be great to have a Black educator. And at that moment, I foolishly thought to myself, well, isn't it going to be great to have a good educator? Silly me. I had so much to learn. In that first year, what I saw was I taught less than 1% of that entire campus. My courses were very specialized. But somehow it's like my room was a draw for every single Black student on that campus. It didn't matter if I was their teacher or not, they were in my space. And that's because they didn't have these spaces to go to where they felt safe and welcome and where they were with someone who looked like them. And that began the process of my learning as an educator. In that first year, I had some really wonderful and brilliant students. And what I started to see is that they were frequently being harassed on campus. They were being accused of misbehavior. They were being marked as special education. And they really kind of had no recourse. And so that started me looking, listening, learning. I worked in a district where, it's known for its high quality across the state of Texas. But when I started looking at our data and breaking it down, there were huge disproportionalities and disparities, not only in academic performance, access to advanced academic courses, but also in terms of discipline disparities. And so I started to notice these things and I started to lean into and learn about equity because my students were humanized in my classroom, whether they were in my classes or not. But I was realizing that on our campus, that wasn't the case and we needed to do something about it. So I started to get really curious about how we might tackle equity. What does racial equity mean, and how do we make sure that every student has what they need? And really what that turned into was this thought of like, how do you boil a whole entire ocean? It's so vast. We can't ignore our history, and we also can't ignore the socio-political climate and context of the world that we're living in. And so we sought out to start creating spaces for students, and that happened in the form of a Black student union. But we couldn't just support students without also educating teachers about how we relate to and educate Black students. And then wider than that, we needed to also create space that engaged community, right? We had a lot of Black educators in our community and a lot of Black elders that no longer had students in schools. And they wanted to be involved and engaged, and the Black Student Union created a way for that to happen. I'll share a little bit more about that in just a minute. And so we created this framework called an elevation framework. And this looks academic in nature, but also you'll see how it played out over time. This framework involved the power of personal narrative, and so allowing students to be themselves, tell their own stories, elevate their voices, and be really humanized in a space that didn't always humanize them. We wanted to foster creativity and creative expression. We wanted to be able to support action and the students self-organizing, and we needed to have communication with some key stakeholders. So creating a student group wasn't enough. We had to also add some support structures in there, which we'll talk about. This is the amazing Micah Moore. So Micah Moore is actually now a junior at Prairie View A&M University, but this was her when she was a sophomore or junior in high school. And one thing that she expressed was that there were holes in our schools where not all students felt included. And so she really had the idea to start the Black Student Unions, and she felt like it was something little, and she was letting it unfold into a bigger movement. And the most amazing thing is Micah now sits on panels to talk to other Black students in our Black Student Union about what her experience is like at an HBCU. She's still doing this work moving forward, and her vision in high school has grown to have a tremendous impact on a school district that has nearly 50,000 students. And so what these frameworks and what this looked like in reality was creating the Black Student Union, which I'm going to tell you about how you might start your own Black Student Union and what that looked like for us. But in order to support the work of the Black Student Union, we also created 2 additional structures. We created the Round Rock High School Equity Team because we needed teachers throughout the day to examine their praxis, and this included me as a Black educator, to examine our treatment of Black students and what we may be doing in our classroom to harm, but also how we might foster a community of inclusion and support. And then we also created the Round Rock Black Parents Association, which effectively acted as a booster club for the Black student unions. Now we have this video, and let's hope that it works. So you're gonna have to tell me if the sound works. You know, we never know with Zoom. Let's see here.
Like, we look good when we're black.
Can you all hear that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we'll actually take it from the beginning, but this really tells the story of our Black Student Union.
Give us suggestions of how to cope, and also encourage us to be determined to get our education, because once you get your education, no one can take that away from you, regardless to who you are. With the atmosphere that's going on now, it's real sad, but hopefully I can share some experiences that might be able to help some individuals have a better understanding of what's going on. You don't know where you're going to go unless you know where you come from, and that's knowing the past. During the time that we attended school at Hopewell, all of the equipment that we had, our band uniforms, basketball uniforms, football uniforms, everything was secondhand. We didn't have much of anything that was new. Joe Johnson, who was our principal at the time, and he was our coach, he was our counselor, and of course our principal. He had 3 or 4 different jobs, but it was like a surrogate father to each one of the students. And of course, a lot of times we'd go over for practice of basketball or either football. There would be signs left for us, you know, negative signs, and we just ignore it. Well, beginning of my second semester, I wanted to come to this school. It had to be voted on. Of course, my father and I discussed it with him more. I didn't know why it had to be a vote, because I had a right to go to the school now. So we decided, since it was my last semester, senior year, to just go ahead and finish at Hopewell, which I did. And shortly after, Anthony Mays was a sophomore at that time, and Anthony decided that he wanted to try to go to school at Round Rock High School, but he was able to go, and he graduated, and so proud of him for being able to do that. So that opened the door for other students. So it was a lot of obstacles, but it molds you, and it helps your character and your determination to, you know, go ahead regardless of the adversities you face. You keep trying.
There are some things that they need to fix here to make students feel more welcome and not feel so more different than other students.
So I just look at it like, you know, we're just labeled those type of kids in the school, and throughout the whole school year, it was just the same thing.
I haven't always felt like there was a sense of unity, and sometimes where there's unity, it's shallow unity. So I personally make it my mission to create unity and to create a sense of community. I think that sometimes we expect conformity of culture, and I think that it's important that we recognize different culture. We'd have a lot more success if we, instead of looking at the US as a melting pot, where the different ingredients have to change form and be melted down and conform to create something new, if we looked at it like a nicely tossed salad where we valued the varying components, but nobody had to be crushed or melted down in order to fit in and create something beautiful. Sometimes I think students self-segregate out of protection. So I think that it will take intentionality and trust building to make students feel safe and accepted in our environment.
I want, like, at least the Black or Mexicans, whatever, them to like become more involved in more of the school.
And we hope to do more things in the future. I had a student approach me about a Black student union or a Black student association, and I think that's really a great idea, because hopefully they'll be able to advocate and make sure that when decisions are being made, they're being made with the consideration of diverse populations of students as well.
Like, we look good when we're black, and that black is beautiful, and then it's good to be different.
I got the idea to start the Black Student Union over the summer. I had attended a conference that a speaker came and spoke about activism and starting, being a participant in activism in her community. So I guess that's what started the spark of thinking about the Black Student Union and wanting to start it at Round Rock. The Black Student Union is an organization for African American students and anyone who wants to be involved to come and talk about issues they feel have affected their life or affected the community around them and their outlook on it and their opinion.
It's pretty much just a safe space for minorities and other people to just come together and learn about black culture and like the issues that we face here in the Round Rock.
Oh no.
And talk about
Space for minorities and other people to just come together and learn about black culture and like the issues that we face here in the Round Rock.
We're getting to the important part.
You might have seen videos like this before.
And while this is going through and loading, so some important context. Before we even started a Black Student Union, a problem was identified, and that problem was that our students noticed the disproportionalities, particularly around discipline, that when they were just existing in the hallways, they were getting in trouble, right? Just for congregating between classes. They were noticing that they didn't have access to the advanced level courses, and they were having to really self-advocate to be considered smart enough to be in any kind of advanced course. And so the development of our Black Student Union was born from a bit of frustration and born from a bit of pain. And the context of the beginning of this documentary is actually that Miss Ella Morrison, who is still very much alive and well and active in our community, was the class of the last Black, what they called Negro school in our district, and was not allowed to move forward and go to our integrated high school. She had to fight for that. And so to see her come from that to where we are today with students being able to self-advocate and make their voice be heard is an incredible, incredible journey. And the last few minutes are going to chronicle what that looked like in its first year. And even as I'm watching this, I get a little emotional because I'm listening to the little tiny voice of some of my students who are now in college or have graduated college that are doing these amazing things that I know the Black Student Union was an incredible foundation for what they're continuing to do throughout their life. Okay, see if we can pick it back up.
wants to be involved to come and talk about it at Round Rock. The Black Student Union is an organization for African American students and anyone who wants to be involved to come and talk about issues they feel have affected their life or affected the community around them and their outlook on it and their opinion.
It's pretty much just a safe space for minorities and other people to just come together and learn about black culture and like the issues that we face here in the Round Rock community.
Something that's really special about Black Student Union and that helps build a culture of community within our group is that we try to make sure that we do a hot topic where it's student generated.
I help create hot topics, which is a way to bring up race and bring attention to race, because I feel like it's an important thing to talk about.
Sometimes it's something upbeat and fun and funny, but a couple times it's been pretty sad to hear how isolated our students have felt on our campus, and how they may have felt at times that people prejudge them because of the color of their skin.
I'm glad to see them finally, organize something. During the time that my niece was going to school here, They did have a little organization. They tried to organize, but they weren't able to completely get that done, what they wanted to do. It helps to make you stronger. It helps you be able to evaluate situations a lot quicker.
Even just sitting in the meeting sometimes and not really controlling the meeting, but just hearing people speak. And I've learned a lot, and I've learned how to deal with situations from topics that we've talked about.
It's very important that they have a resource to go to and discuss their issues and let it be known so some changes can be made.
I think that when you're in an environment where you are marginalized or your existence is minimized, it's incredibly important that we have these kind of groups to help with the formation of, great self-esteem. And these are the years when your self-esteem is formed and you become the vibrant, confident person that you're going to be in your adult life. So this will help them to understand who they are and become who they really want to be. You are beautiful, you are smart, you are intelligent, you are who you want to be. So with this being Black History Month and the movie Black Panther having such a large amount of success and promotion within the area, this would be a great opportunity for the Black Student Union to do something cohesively as a group. So I decided that I would purchase tickets for them to go see the movie and told them about the campaign and how important it is for our community to be involved in our city government. And I asked them to let their parents know that I was running, and apparently they did. They got the word out and I got elected.
We live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and in my elementary school I grew up with predominantly white people, so I never really got to embrace my culture, and I started meeting more people that were of my culture and started learning more of that, so I wanted to join BSU.
And it's not just for African American students, it's for students of any race, any color to come and speak their mind and give their opinion, but also listen and understand where we come from.
I think that sometimes when you do not look like other people in your classroom, you pass people in the hallway and you may not think that you have shared experiences, but these activities show our students that a lot of the things that they experience are shared.
I can't tell you the unity there is in being with someone who looks like you and shares the same experiences as you. Sadly, sometimes they're negative experiences, but a lot of times they're positive experiences. Black culture and music and just like movement and verve and excitement. It's empowered students to come together and to feel and be represented on our campus. It's still early, so I think Black Student Union is still developing into what it will eventually become, but it's been a great experience.
Often there's an assumption that if I'm celebrating one particular culture that I'm diminishing another, but this organization works very hard to debunk that myth, because just because I'm celebrating my culture does not mean in any way that I'm diminishing yours. I want to facilitate and celebrate both.
When other people of different races come, it shows that they care, or it shows like they have an interest on how we feel or our opinions about the hot topics that we talk about during the meetings. It is geared towards African American students, but I feel like it is a place where anyone can come, just like everyone celebrates Black History Month. Like, not only is it for Black people, any and everyone can celebrate.
Okay, so we will stop there. And I know this is a keynote and I could just talk all day based off my experience, but who better to tell you about the experience than the students and those who experienced it. So that video was actually made, I believe, 5 to 6 years ago. And so what you saw was one Black Student Union at the flagship high school. We have 55 campuses in Round Rock ISD, and now there's a Black Student Union at all 5 traditional high schools, plus the early college high school, several middle schools, and we've even started our own first Black Student Union at an elementary school. And so some of the highlights that these students shared was it gave them a place to be safe. It gave them a place for them to be themselves. It gave them a place to celebrate their culture. And, you know, we faced some barriers in starting a Black student union. We had people ask, well, wouldn't you be upset if we started a white student union? And the response of our students was really, everything's a white student union. You know, in a school district where that is predominantly white, there is the feeling that everything can indeed be the white student union. And so this allowed them to prioritize what they said, and this is a quote, Blackness for 50 minutes at a time, which was a wonderful thing for them. It allowed them to get engaged in their community. So here on the left, you'll see them marching at Austin's traditional MLK March, which I believe is one of the largest ones in the state of Texas. And they loved participating, and to this day, that's still an event that we participate in, especially when the pandemic allows. You know, over 3,000 students and only 5% Black students, and I have this room that's entirely full of Black students, which is incredible. And then this space also allowed them to be active participants in the wider school community and to advocate for what they needed. In this space, we were able to identify that they felt that there was a lack of support from teachers, that there was a lack of leadership opportunities for them within the wider context of school. We found out that the use of the N-word was pervasive, and not just among Black students, but actually they were able to articulate that it was being used by non-Black students towards them in a way that was intended to power over them. And with that knowledge that they shared and those shared experiences that they felt powerless to address, we were able to come together as adults, both educators and parents, and make sure that their needs were met and that what they needed was addressed. And so there's a civic nature to what we do in Black student unions. There's definitely a community nature to what we do in Black student unions. And there are even academic implications for Black student unions for sure. What we know when we're talking about brain science, Zaretta Hammond wrote a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And it talks about when we are able to create environments that foster safety for students, they are able to relax and learn. When that is not true, there's what's called the amygdala hijack, where cortisol is released, and these students, our students, are in fight, flight, or freeze. And so that may mean that our students are in class, they are present, we're not dealing with truancy, and they are still activated in a way that makes it hard to learn and retain knowledge. And so there are implications for creating this space, building community, helping students that may be, you know, the only Black students in some of their academic classes build a network of strength and solidarity. And even as we see students at different levels, you know, 12th graders tutoring 10th graders, just building incredible community across an entire campus, but in a wider community. And we'll save that. That video is about parent-teacher partnership, which we found to be really important. Now, in order to foster strength in the student space, we had to do some education for the teachers. And I know I'm here to talk about Black student unions, but we cannot talk about the Black student experience without talking about and figuring out how the wider context of what they're experiencing at schools is impacting them. So concurrently, while we were working on developing our Black student unions, we were also working on developing our educators. And we did that through creating a logic model and through creating some programming, some training that helped educators be culturally responsive to the needs of their students. Right? You know, we're in this Black-centric space and we're empowering students to use their voices to speak up. But then there's also a power dynamic when they go into a classroom and they need to advocate for their needs and their teachers are not receptive to their advocacy. And so we also worked concurrently in developing the educators that were serving Black students. Now in New Mexico, you all are incredibly fortunate to have your African American Quality of Life Commission and to have the Black Education Act. In some states like Texas, we're just still fighting for students to be able to have culturally relevant and culturally specific learning opportunities. And so you all are already so far ahead in doing this work and hopefully in preparing educators to teach Black students and honor their dignity. And so you'll start to see here some of the ways that we connected in community. So on the left is a picture of a teacher training that we had that also included various community members. Here in the center, you will see the first Black City Councilwoman, Hilda Montgomery, who's still sitting on the City Council to this day, coming to talk to our students and invest in our students, and also encourage them to do their civic duty in terms of voting and getting their parents out to vote as well. And here in the middle, we had a Black History Month exhibit. We worked with the graphic design classes to create posters, one for every single classroom specific to content area to celebrate Black History Month. And we worked to celebrate Black history that existed outside of, you know, the norms of what we celebrate during Black History Month. So we made sure that there were some contemporary figures in Blackness, and every teacher had a poster with some information and a bio, and they really didn't have a choice. And it felt great to be represented throughout our campus. On this last slide, you will see the very first HBCU fair, historically Black College and University Fair. So Round Rock ISD, I've already told you, is a suburban district outside of Austin, and Round Rock ISD enjoys the title of having the largest college fair in Central Texas. However, in that huge college fair that had hundreds of representatives from universities and colleges all over the United States, there were only 1 or 2 historically Black colleges and universities. And we realized that it was very important for students to know that they had that option. And so the Black Parents Association, which I will tell you about shortly, the parent part of this came together and hosted our own HBCU fair, which is still going strong, even virtually during COVID, to introduce Black students that may not know to the goodness of HBCUs. Interestingly enough, I was a student in this very same district and was given the opportunity to attend an HBCU. But because of the messaging that I was receiving at that time in that very predominantly white district, I did not accept that and went to a predominantly white institution where I did experience harm, being not only a Black person, but also a Black athlete. I was on the dance team. And so in hindsight, realizing what this does and opening doors for students who may not know or whose families may not have a history of attending HBCUs, we felt that this was a really important investment. And what started as the parents creating this has now netted support from the district in creating and sustaining the HBCU fairs. So this is just a little bit of data and insight about the training that was offered around racial equity, courageous conversations about race, and the attendees sharing that it was indeed helpful for their daily work and improving their daily work. And so this was something that happened alongside the creation of the Black student unions. So really, when we're thinking about this and we're talking about this, why Black student unions? Why is that important? It's very important for students to have the space to just be and be themselves, right? You know, there's a lot of code switching that happens, and I think that that's something that I struggle with as a Black educator. A lot of times we can tell our students to code switch and think about the appropriateness of their speech or actions in various places. We also have to think about the fact that these systems were not built to support and sustain our Black students. So while we're doing the work of addressing systems that are harmful to our students, we also, it's been helpful to create these spaces where we could talk about specific Black issues that they were facing within our community. It's been amazing to celebrate Black culture. Round Rock, though it's largely white and actually a product of white flight from Austin, dating over 100 years back, enjoys some very rooted Black families in the area. And we've been able to partner with them to celebrate Black culture. Having these spaces allowed us to actively and routinely examine racial and educational inequities. So hearing from students about their day-to-day experiences allowed us as adults, both educators, parents, and community members, to figure out how we would address our students' experiences and concerns and how we would improve education for them. Same thing, addressing current realities around racial and educational inequity through all systems. So what does it look like to begin a BSU? I have to say that I believe that Black student unions are incredibly important no matter what the educational context is. So from our Black student unions in Round Rock ISD, we've helped launch Black student unions at nearby charter schools. We even have a convening of homeschool parents who are working and educating their students at home, whether it's because of the pandemic or their dissatisfaction with public and private education, that are also coming to our events and being able to engage. Another really important thing I would like to say about Black student unions in a suburban district is that we operated like an entire district-wide union. So once Round Rock High School's Black Student Union started, we supported the charter of other Black Student Union organizations at the other high schools. We did lots of socials and events together, because when you're that underrepresented in a campus, that's a really big lift to do all of your social events, all of your civic events, all of your community service events on your own. So we convene as entire district-wide Black student unions throughout the year as well, and that also gives our students strength in terms of advocacy for their needs. Gain support from school administration. So we've put together a Black Student Union toolkit, which I'm happy to share. If you haven't started a Black Student Union, it also might be helpful if you've already started a Black Student Union and you could use support on your campuses. But gaining support from our school administration was incredibly important. Interestingly enough, we found the most support in our white school administrator. Previously, when we had a Black school administrator, they were hesitant to start a Black student union because they were hesitant about the pushback they would receive. So when I'm speaking to you all in New Mexico, I'm really thrilled that this has been what feels like a legislative priority and you already have support. But the buy-in for from the school administration was very helpful, and organizations like this are students' right. It is their right to be represented on campus. Preparing parents to engage and volunteer. This was incredibly important, and we did a lot around parent, teacher, and student partnership, because it's going to take all of those levels to really unify Black families, mobilize them to meet the needs of students in the wider educational context, and then uplift our students. That includes uplifting our students to positions of leadership. We went from Black students being super underrepresented to now I'm so happy to see, and this seems minor, but our Black Student Union president being nominated and winning prom king. You know, like that recognition, that visibility of I'm here and I matter and I'm a part of this community too is huge. Ready the community, they want to help. So we've been able to continue our journey because of both the philanthropic and just the in-person, in-kind support of our community. We didn't realize how excited our community would be to support the efforts of our Black Student Union. So if they need food donated, our community is on it. If they need community service, our community is on it. Now, 6 years since the inception of our Black Student Union, we had a end of year banquet with all of the high schools represented, several hundred people in attendance. They were able to get kente cloth stoles if they were graduating, which they proudly wore at their graduations. And it was just such a beautiful community event that brought the entire community together. And most importantly, support and empower the students to lead. So for our Black students, and I'm speaking specifically suburban, and I think that some of this is also in all different kinds of school systems, we don't always see our Black students be able to assume leadership roles, right? There's like a kind of like a culturally specific knowledge of I am meant to step into a leadership role and be the president of the student body, and that doesn't always happen when our students are not in very Black spaces. And what we've seen with the creation of Black Student Union is we've seen Black students rise to leadership positions in other organizations as well and be called upon as leaders. and be seen as leaders. And so that's been very important for us. And even now, as I've shared, so many of our students have moved on to college, some have even graduated. They're coming back to provide training and support for our students who are still in high school, and that's incredibly important. So starting your own Black Student Union, it's important to create a collaborative leadership model that deepens the bench. One thing that was really important to us was to be true to our ancestral roots, meaning that, you know, our Black Student Union officers, it doesn't always have to be a hierarchical structure, and making sure that we had very young, so freshman members of our club shadow and partner with the older leadership of our club so that they can continue leading and developing the organization. One thing that was important to us also was being prepared to build networks of support outside of our district as well. So partnering with other districts that have Black student unions. Even now, the excitement of me hearing about the Black Education Act, I want to bring that home to where we are in Texas. And being prepared to do our own work as adults around racial and educational equity. I already shared with you, I had a lot to unlearn and unpack, even as a Black woman, to be able to best serve Black students. And the public education system is a very racially violent system. We see that in the outcomes for Black students, whether we're talking about attendance, academics, discipline. And so it's really important to realize that we often are working in a system that wasn't intended for our students. And how do we work in the system but not on the system's behalf while supporting our students? And a lot of that learning and intentionality helped to self-reflect and figure out how I, as an adult, might be doing harm to my Black students as a part of the system. Another thing that has been incredibly important has been connecting with organizations that are doing this work. And some of these are national organizations and some of these are specific to Texas, but that's besides the point. What the point is that there are community organizations that have a long history of this work that are ready to support our Black student unions and hear the heartbeat and the heart cry of our students. So we worked with the Austin Area Urban League. The IDRA is a national organization, and then we worked with some local nonprofits and organizations to support our students. One really important resource that I want to highlight if you're starting or supporting a Black student union that I think that every educator and parent should know about is an organization out of California called Save Your Six. Save Your Six focuses on organizing and educating parents and students around the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Title VI protections at school, which protects students' rights around race and their identity. And so that's been really important because as we've worked together, I've shared that we've experienced incredibly joyous occasions, but then we've also had to acknowledge that our students were experiencing harm at school and we needed to protect them and perhaps at some times take action to improve their educational experience. So I wanted to provide you with my contact information in case you had any questions or concerns or thoughts. And I know we're going to have a panel so that we can dialogue, but what was started from really one student, and even prior to that, the pain of multiple students saying, I feel like I don't belong here and I don't have a place, has blossomed into something so incredibly beautiful. We're seeing increased academic performance. We're seeing increased risk-taking in terms of taking harder coursework. Because our students have a place where they can be supported, and there's also this network built internally within the high school of upperclassmen sharing with underclassmen that they should take this challenging course because they can do it and they can have help, and note sharing and just building support. We've seen increased engagement from parents. Another cool thing that happens is that our Black Student Union actually looks like the United Nations now. And not only is it a supportive space for Black students, but it is a space for students that support Black students to come and learn and uplift their friends. And that has increased, buy-in across our campus of uplifting Black students as well, and has also spun off, and this is not the purpose, but this is just kind of like a fringe benefit, spun off into like other culturally specific clubs for underrepresented students, which makes their voice so much stronger as students of color as a whole as well. And so it's been a really incredibly beautiful experience, but I think the takeaway that I want everyone to think about is that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think it's important for us to think about the context of education in the United States right now. There are very few Black educators, and we're seeing a shift away from you know, we're having shortages of educators in general, and so we cannot put this weight only on sponsors. We have to come around sponsors as a community, no matter if we're school board members, parents, professors, to support this work as they support our students and Black student unions. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited about the panel and getting to chat more about what it looks like to start, and not only start, but support and grow Black student unions.
Tiffanie, thank you so much, right? That is just an incredible experience that you had with those students and being able to build the BSU, and something that we are looking forward to doing here in New Mexico at more and more schools. I could really see from that video just how impactful a BSU is for students. And we know how important those BSUs are. We know how important those culturally specific spaces are. And just not so much, I loved how you talked about, you know, how it opens up the doors to leadership, and you said risk taking, and I was like, yes, risk taking. That's what we want for more of our students. And so thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I'm sure many of you have questions for Tiffanie, and so if you want to put those into the chat, if you want to put those into the Q&A forum, we will bring them in. Right now, I want to bring in the rest of our panel so that we can all have a conversation with you. And I'm really excited that people on our panel are some of those New Mexico community leaders who have been thinking about this issue for years. They have been involved in education. They've been involved in making space for belonging for our Black students and for other students who come from marginalized communities. They've understood how important culturally specific spaces are. So I want to bring into our virtual room here, Brennan Bowman, who is a licensed school counselor, a mother of 3, and she is also CEO of the With a Village, which is an academic success coaching program. And then also jumping in at the last minute, we had an emergency with Kaya Brown, and so Mr. Newton Robinson is going to join us this evening. He is an HR professional, someone who's been a mentor for a long time, and the vice president of the board of Justice Code, which is a local nonprofit here that was recently started. And then we also have Sonia Lara, who is a wife and mother of 3, a leader in education. You know, she is at CNM doing this hard work for us, and also someone who is very invested in racial equity. And so thank you guys all for joining us tonight. We've really taken special care to invite different groups and communities for tonight's special event. The attendees that are here with us, they are people who are leaders in education. They are our community leaders. They are people in our philanthropic community. And we wanted to make sure that each of these groups were represented tonight, knowing that they should be involved and engaged in order for us to move this forward. And so we really want to talk about BSUs as a whole, but also we really want to talk about how important this is individually for our students and for us as a community. And so Tiffanie, we really got to hear from you. I love this idea of how do you boil an ocean, right? And so I want to open it up to each of our panelists first to really kind of share, you know, for you, what does it mean? How does racial equity and culturally specific spaces connect for you? What are the things that you're really thinking contribute to why we need a BSU or culturally specific spaces in our New Mexico public schools? And so this one I'm going to ask each of you to answer, and then we'll open it up for more of a discussion. So Brennan, can I just ask you, what exactly is important to you about this?
So, hello everyone. I will just say for me, I went to a HBCU. I went to, elementary through high school. It was majority Black schools. A lot of my professional career was in, like 98% African American schools. And then we moved to New Mexico, and it's just like, whoa, wait a minute, and me as a parent, knowing that, I had this experience of being, with around my people, for the majority of my life through grade school and both of my degrees. Then I bring my children into this space, and now they are the minority. So it's important for me because I need them to understand that they are still important. They are still special. Like, no matter what, they are to be true to themselves. And I think for them to be surrounded by people who are in the same space as them, who deal with the same things as them and look like them. My 10-year-old, he is very aware of having Black friends and, very aware, and he's very intentional about being around other Black kids. And unfortunately, they don't have BSUs in the elementaries yet, but that's something to talk about. That's something, because now, as a parent, I know that this is something that they need. And it's something that every Black student here in New Mexico deserves to have to be successful. So, yeah.
Thank you. And, high school is the start, and elementary schools, we can follow with that next. But Sonia, you're coming from a higher education background. Why is this important to you for both high schools and higher education?
Well, I certainly agree with what Brennan shared, the idea of having space for Blackness. Tiffanie, I think that video was brilliant, and the way you communicated that idea of Black students don't always feel like they can just exist. There's always this idea or this pressure that they sense that just existing is not enough, that there's not enough value in that in order to really feel like you are worthy of being who you are. There's that idea of defaulting or assuming a different identity. And so that idea of in higher ed and high school, being able to, in those formative times of your life, right, when you're making a lot of critical decisions, a lot of changes, recognizing that part of what you want to maintain and embrace is your Blackness, that is not a weakness for you to feel like you have to shield or hide when you're in general population. The idea that Blackness has power and has value, and again, doesn't need to be great or exceptional and by the world standards in order to have merit or value or even justification for existence. So to me, when I think about Black student unions, I think about a space that is intentional to provide that assurance, that recognition, that acknowledgement that you can be successful living your culture, living your truth, living who you are. And so those opportunities, as much as we can have them. And again, in higher ed, we're able to help with and be thoughtful of how this might stretch forward to your future career. You go to higher ed because you want to advance and make a living for yourself. And the thought and idea that you can own your Blackness in your job and in your role, to the point of the wonderful work our leaders here for the state have done to establish that Black Education Act, and then the Crown Act, those ideas of how we're able to be ourselves and show up as we are. So Black student unions really reinforce that in a way that society doesn't always embrace.
So true, right? And that's really what we're trying to do, is create spaces that our children can go into in ways that they're not embraced in society and other spaces. And Newton, how about you? Why are BSU something that you think are important for us to increase in New Mexico schools? I think we still have you on mute.
Sorry about that. So good evening, everyone. Our students need to see positive representation, because too many times within our educational system, they see people who look at them in a negative way. As mentors, we have a role to play. Our focus is to show them that people who look like them are positive, professional people who believe in education, and more importantly, believe they can succeed. The video brought it out very well. BSUs provide a safe space for the Black community to have access to our Black students. And I believe that the BSUs are training ground for our students to be the Black majority leader in New Mexico, and more importantly, in the United States.
Absolutely, right? Here in New Mexico and in the United States, but we are trying to keep all of our students here in New Mexico. We know how important it is for them to stay in our state. We want to, make sure that our students feel welcome throughout the state in their high school careers and their college careers. And, one of those things that I've been reading a lot about is just how important identity development and school belonging is for our students to have strong achievement. And so, we know that BSUs are a solution, and I want to talk with us about that a little bit. And Tiffanie, if you can share with us, some experiences that you had, but really for you all, what do you think, why are BSUs so important for creating this sense of belonging, for creating this space of identity? How is that this is the solution?
I think I can speak from a place of very personal experience, being a Black student in the same district that I later worked in. It wasn't until adulthood that I fully felt affirmed in my Blackness. So much of me navigating the world was me conforming, or me having to continually code switch and hide parts of myself. And so the affirming the identity and the brilliance of Black students at that young age empowers them to navigate the world from a place of acceptance and belonging. And there's still very challenging places in our world. We know that. As a career and technical education teacher, my passion has really always been around workforce and how our students enter into the workforce and have the most opportunity. We know that as Black people, we are brilliant and resourceful because we've had to be to navigate systems that weren't built for us all along. And having that positive identity, affirmation in this space, I believe helps students also navigate career space. And then I also feel that it helps open them up to opportunity. When I reflect on my life, I'm deeply saddened that I never experienced an HBCU. I experienced in my both undergrad and master's experiences places where I didn't always feel safe and welcome and okay being myself. And so my greatest desire is that we affirm students early and often. And this is also imperative to celebrate them and celebrate their wins and successes, but also be able to have enough trust and communication to where they can flag when they need help. Because one thing I'll tell you about these experiences of our Black students is they were experiencing trauma. They had teachers from the front of the classroom sharing and assuming that they didn't have a dad at home, or touching their hair without permission. And because it was so normalized as part of their experience and they were treated like a sideshow, right? Something to be observed and played with, but not really integrated into the full learning experience. Because it had been normalized, they didn't always speak up about what they were experiencing. And so there was no help for them, right? They didn't even necessarily tell their parents because it was normal to them. So I think all of those are reasons why it's really important to have these affirming spaces.
So important, so important. Brennan, I see that you want to add to it.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. And for me, it comes from a different perspective, but kind of intertwining in the same. As a school counselor, I always am, encouraging my students to, love yourself, be who you, it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to embrace, every part of who you are, no matter your skin color, your gender, your pronoun, whatever it is, be who you are. But in my office, that's okay, right? But when they leave my office, that is something where they face the challenge of, well, I can't, she said be myself, but I can't be myself because out here they're expecting me to be something I am not. And I think having those safe spaces for our Black students, and even students who are, allies and supporters of, Black students and the things that Black students go through, I think that is really, really important and helps to reaffirm that it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to rock your fro. It's okay to wear your locks. It's okay to love anime, but still have a lot of melanin. It's okay to be who you are. So I think they have to be able to learn that and to be able to affirm that early to be successful as adults, because a lot of adults, too many adults, aren't affirmed until they are working on themselves. Maybe they're parents themselves, so now they're trying to affirm themselves and also affirm their kid, so they have to be able to be affirmed early so that to be successful.
I just add on there, when I think about the work that we do in higher ed and how Black student unions have been very incredibly important because we don't have one kind of profile of learner, right? So there used to be the idea that you go out of high school and then you go to college and you're this young 18 to 24 age. But knowing that having a Black student union, you're able to come and experience life at different stages and embrace all of that beauty and see and understand how you can still be successful no matter where you are or where you start. To me, that's been really rewarding, is identifying that possibility. And Brennan, I just want to amplify what you said about the idea of allies. Having a Black student union creates that idea of community and that space where people who may not identify as a Black person or part of the Black diaspora, they're able to come and have this safe space to learn. And that gives them an opportunity to become allies and advocates, but also it helps our Black students understand that there are people who support them because they are, often subjected to images or instances that make them feel like they're alone. And so just that idea of Black student unions being able to accomplish all of those things is really important.
Absolutely right. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to engage all of our students. And Tiffanie, you really shared with us how important BSUs are in moving forward students as leadership, and I love that idea of that mentoring throughout the, throughout the years of being able to learn how to be a leader from someone who is, a year, maybe 2 years older than you. And we really want to encourage our students to take the lead and be empowered to create their own opportunities. And at other times we really want to say like, no, our students shouldn't have the responsibility for this, right? That the responsibility for this should sit with us. And so, where do you all think, like, what are the responsibilities? Who is responsible for creating this safe space, this sense of belonging for our students? Really thinking about what's the role of students, what's the role of administrators, what's the role of our philanthropic community to really engage in all of this? Where do you guys see that role at?
I'm sorry, Brennan. Okay, I really appreciated, Tiffanie, how you identified all the different folks who are required to be able to make BSU successful. You had the parents there, you had the community, you had the administration, the students themselves, instructors. It takes all of that work for this to be really successful. I think when you ask that question, Amy, what comes to mind is that idea that schools in general understand that there is a problem, that there is a need to have some kind of reparative practice. And we see that usually implemented in high school or different spaces as kind of a one size fits all, if you will, approach. Let's have a Be Kind campaign, or let's have a Be Inclusive campaign. And those are wonderful steps. And it's a way to acknowledge that there's a need to be able to support people who feel like they are being excluded from society or from that space in the educational system. What I believe, what I notice is that the idea kind of victimizes, and it creates this deficit mindset for our children, right? We tell them, we want you to be included, and if you're not feeling included, scan a QR code and report that idea. And to me, that reinforces this idea that they are victims, that this is something happening to them, and it's grouped together with the same kind of logic that happens, high school teasing. You go to high school and you have a pimple and people tease you. As a parent, I can go and take my kid to the dermatologist and get that remedied, right? They have crooked teeth, I can take them to the dentist and get that remedied. And we're saying that Blackness is the same thing as this, these situations that we want to remedy, like that is something to be fixed, and so not having something specific and reparative for Black student unions, as for Black students, I should say, is harmful, I think, to Black identity. And we recognize that as school officials, as school administration, that this is necessary because we initially have these campaigns. We just maybe don't have the right solution that's specific to address the situations our students are facing, our Black students, our marginalized students are facing. And so when I think about the idea of whose responsibility is it, I think some of those folks are taking ownership. They're trying to do an effort, and I appreciate that effort. It's just to really be effective at that, we need to take it another step forward. And I would call for, where we can have funding and think about opportunities for having not, all of that weight on our students to support. I think her name was Micah. She's a rock star. Like the idea that she was able to do that is incredible. We have students right now, though, that are still emerging from the pandemic, that have had a year of loss of education. And to say that it's just the students' responsibility, I feel like that's unfair. It's an unfair burden to place on just their shoulders alone. For us to think about it more broadly again, and have that community, that village, to help support students as they think about and try to work towards achieving some space to find that connection in that community that they need to be and feel successful and seen. So hope that kind of gets to that point, that question that you asked.
Absolutely, definitely gets to the point, and really enlightens me in thinking about how we're asking our young Black children, our teenagers, to fix Blackness. And I think that is definitely something we do not want to do. And Newton, I really want to ask you, because you're part of creating this whole nonprofit that really does this work outside of the school systems. For you, what do you think is the role of school administrators versus students, or versus those of us in the community or philanthropy? Oh, we still have you on mute. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So by not having or relying too much on on providing enrichment for our students, I believe that the community have to get behind our students, our BSUs. We have great leaders in New Mexico, in the community. We have great educators. We cannot rely on the system to help our BSU students. We have to get behind them, and we know how it is to start a 501c3 organization. So we should be able to go into the community and bring out those folks who wants to support our African American students. And yes, there are quite a few of them. Our students should not have to do that. We should be able to get out and help them focus. There is a BSU student that came and wanted to know how I started my mentorship program. The reason she asked that question was she wanted to start one in the 11th grade because she saw the need for her peers to have something that they can fall back on. And we have to remove the roadblocks out of their way so that they can start a BSU at their own level in the 11th grade if they see fit to do that. We have to prepare those BSU students to be peer leaders. We have to get them to be mentors themselves. And what a wonderful way of coming alongside of them and help them through that process.
Absolutely right. I think that, young people teach us so much as they take on this leadership. And sometimes we can guide them, but a lot of times they're pushing us forward as well, especially in, now when we're talking about really moving forward racial equity within schools. Our young people are really asking us for something very specific, and mentoring is part of that, and opportunities for leadership is part of that, and opportunities to be seen and not isolated is part of that. And so, when I think about BSUs as the solution, then I think when we don't have BSUs, we're losing something, right? And so what exactly do you think that New Mexico schools are losing because we don't have BSUs in most of our schools?
Can I chime in? I was trying to be quiet, but I just have to. I think a lot of schools don't understand the benefits of BSU. I have seen firsthand how having a BSU can take a student who is struggling and not finding their place in a school, be able to find their place and be able to begin to advocate for themselves, and just to have that middle person. Sometimes it just took a mediation between the student, me, and the teacher as the sponsor, just to kind of bridge that gap and get that student to where they belong. At Cleveland High School, and that's where, and I'm not like promoting Cleveland, but that's where I taught. And at Cleveland High School, the graduation gap between Caucasian and African American students was very slim. And I like to think that was because we had a very strong BSU. And I said had a very strong BSU because it takes sponsors and people, like you said, in the community, and that's teachers as well, who are willing to put the time and effort into creating a strong BSU. Not just to say you have a BSU, but to really create that strong community. And so I think administrators in schools need to understand that, you have a population of students who are struggling, and they are not struggling because they can't do it. That's absolutely not why they're struggling. They're not struggling it because they're in a low socioeconomic. They're not struggling because they're students with disabilities and need to be in special education. They're not struggling for that reason. They're struggling because of their race And because of their race, they feel unsafe in the school environment. And that's why they're struggling. And if you give them that safe spot, they can thrive and they will thrive. And you can see those graduation gaps decreasing that exist for no reason, just because you don't want to address what it really is. I'm going to say one little fact about New Mexico that it's there, is public knowledge, but people are not talking about it. During the pandemic, it was believed that graduation rates were going to go down for all groups. It was just believed that, home environment's not the environment for students to be in, and blase. But when the graduation rates came out, to everyone's surprise, students had a good graduation rate. But what no one is talking about is that our Black students graduated at a higher percentage than they normally did in the school setting. And so, of course, they want to say, well, it was easier, it was online, they were graduating. No, because that was not seen across every group. They graduated because they were at home in a safe environment. They did not have to worry about their race. They did not have to worry about monkey sounds when they're walking down the hallway. They didn't have to worry about being confronted by the N-word every single day. Literally, that's what they're going through. They didn't have to worry about dealing with teachers who just wanted them to fail, so they made their life a living you-know-what in schools. They didn't have to worry about the bullying because of their race. They didn't have to worry about people messing with their hair because of their race. They didn't have to worry about that. All they had to worry about was school. To say that, and I promise I'll be quiet for the rest of the time.
You better not promise to be quiet. And for those of you who do not know, Simone Van is the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the New Mexico Public Education Department. And we're so excited. Girl, jump in whenever you want to. And I think this is the perfect time for us at the Office of African American Affairs to announce, right, that we really believe in this. We really believe that we need to continue to move this forward. And so we are making a public call that New Mexico public schools should increase the number of Black student unions. And at the same time, we are taking action to make sure that we can create space for that as well. And so the Public Education Department Black Education Act team and the Office of African American Affairs is partnering to create a virtual BSU, so that we will have websites, we will have events, we will have all of that where Black students throughout the state can engage virtually. And that does not mean that the schools are, oh, well, the virtual is happening, so we don't have to do it. We still want our schools to really work on that, right? I see in the chat, Arlen said, yep, went up 5 to 10%. Arlen, thank you so much for highlighting that. That is really great news to hear. And that also, I would love to hear other things, things that you all have in the chat, things that you all have in the Q&A. If you want to raise your hand, I think we can unmute you and be able to have you add to that as well. Brennan.
So I'm going to speak from a parent's point of view. I live on the west side of town, and when they had the meetings about, the schedule change for the new upcoming year, they had a meeting. Well, I went, of course, and I was the only Black parent there. So I say that to say, we as parents have to do a better job with advocating for our kids, with advocating for what they need. Because what I've noticed is that, when I go to things, I want to make sure I'm going to be a part of, the, what's it called? I went and volunteered at my son's school. I'm going to be at my daughter's school, the little Hawk parents. Yep, I'm coming. Because as a parent, we have to be involved. And when they see that, other races are not the only races that can be a part of their child's education, that we take this serious too, that we are volunteers, we are here, we are, wanting the best for our kids. And I think that is one way that they will know that we're serious about this. We're serious about what our students need, is when we as parents say, hey, we are here. What's happening to our students in this school is not right. We, demand that we have these safe spaces for our students. Our parents have to do a better job at stepping up and being a part of the conversation, so that, the schools will take them seriously. Like, we really, really have to do a better job, because they take our Black parents, and even I've seen white parents of Black children, because I do see that, some of our Black students are adopted. So, yes, parents, guardians, caregivers, all of that. We have to do a better job with being visual, with showing that this is important to us, and that we are here to help partner with the schools, the city, to do whatever we need to do to make these safe spaces for our babies. So, yes.
Brennan, that is such a great point. And, one of the conversations that we've been having with Black parents is a lot of our Black parents grew up in these schools that didn't feel safe as well, right? And so that now as an adult, it somehow, carries over. I think, Tiffanie, you really pointed this out. They're going through trauma. And so if you went through trauma as a high school student in that location, do you feel also welcome to show up for the PTO and to show up to volunteer? And so, Tiffanie, I just love the idea of a Black parent association. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So the Black Round Rock Black Parents Association was established in 2015, when in Round Rock ISD we had a Black student choke slammed by a cop on campus, and it made the national news. So the parents convened, and the organization was really born out of pain. But what we've seen in the past couple of years is that it's also this incredible space for joy. So I'm also a part of, though I'm not a parent yet, I am part of the Round Rock Black Parents Association, where we have 3 pillars. We seek to mobilize. So that means we get people out at board meetings to hear what's going on in the community. If there are issues, if you have a student that's receiving special education services and this is your first ARD, annual review determination, or you have a 504, IEP, any kind of information, paperwork that you need for your student, that's a large learning curve in general. For a Black parent that this may be the first time they encounter this system, they may need somebody to go with them to support. So that's one of our pillars for mobilization, is how can we really support each other and get out in the community and mobilize for our good and be, a voice, just like Brennan was saying, like show up and get parents to show up, and sometimes when it's needed, show out. So we seek to mobilize, we seek to unify. It's very difficult, and it seems like this is the same case in New Mexico, where Black people are very stratified. Like, we are spread out across the community, and I think that that's something that harms us. And so we work to unify by bringing Black parents or parents of Black students, because Micah's mother is white and she's very involved and very engaged, but Micah's advocacy is what brought her in. So also unifying and bringing parents together across the district to work in unity and to also enjoy fun. We love providing Black joy, moments of Black joy. That can sometimes be hard to come by in this world. And then our last pillar is to really uplift. So how do we get parents in positions of power in PTA, PTO? How do we get Black parents and parents of Black students on our school board? How do we uplift them to these district level committees? In Texas, you're required to have a SHAC, a Student Health Advisory Committee. A lot of times we're not represented because we don't know the people on the board, or, we don't know anybody to be appointed. And so this organization has really acted as a support structure for the Black student unions. The question was asked earlier, like, how much labor are we expecting our Black students to do? And I think that's an excellent question. They should just be able to be kids. But this Black parent organization and association steps in so that our students can be kids, and that we can support them, we can advocate for them, we can take on what is sometimes a power struggle and a power dynamic with white teachers and Black students. So we're happy to talk about and support that as well, but that's been extremely valuable in our experience and necessary to uplifting Black students.
Thank you. Kimberly.
Hello, I think I'm feeling like Simone, like I'm trying to sit still and not really say anything, but I wanted to acknowledge a couple of things. One, Tiffanie, thank you so very much for elevating the need to educate educators, right? One of the questions that you asked was, how do we, about engaging parents? And I know that a couple of you also kind of weighed in on that. And so one of the things for me, I am a clinical therapist. And so I have worked in schools and worked with students that experience trauma over 25 years. And the one thing that people, I think, underestimate is the impact of trauma on the brain. It physically, Texas Christian University does some amazing research on trauma and the brain. And so there are physical challenges and changes that happen when children are overexposed to trauma for extended periods of time. And so when we're thinking about, providing support to students and educating people about the impact and the benefits of BSUs, we use this, we look at it as a protective factor, right? We know that our students have many risk factors, but BSUs are actually protective factors that can offset some of that physical trauma in the brain. The other thing is, as a parent advocate and as an emerging organizational psychologist, I am very intentional about making sure that school districts understand the unintentional barriers that parents, and specifically parents of color, have when it comes to engagement. And a lot of that is jargon and language, right? And so it's nice that we have all of these degrees and all of this education, but it is extremely important that we can explain things as a kindergartner in a way that a kindergartner can understand it, because we take for granted that our parents are reading these documents, these long, legal term documents, and that our parents understand what they mean. And a lot of times they don't. And so there in and of itself is an invisible barrier. And then I also tell them, look at your documents and your marketing materials. Do our students, do our parents see themselves represented in those things? Another unintentional barrier and another unintentional gate that says, you don't belong here. And we internalize those things, and it's sometimes difficult to articulate when you're in a room full of people who have 50,000 degrees, but yet can't even talk to you like you're a human being. And they want you to come up to their level. And we have to change that kind of narrative and that type of experience when it comes to education, because a lot of our parents, they want to be engaged, but they feel intimidated. I know in working with our hotline, we just launched our hotline, with the Black Education Act. And that is something that we are hearing echoed is, can you come to this meeting with me to meet with these administrators? That speaks volumes to us, because it says to us, yes, our parents may have every right to be outraged and be offended, but that's just a reason for the system to dismiss, because there is a passionate concern that is being expressed. And so I think that, systems across the board, we have to do better with identifying and addressing unintentional barriers for parent engagement. I'm sorry, I'm going to be quiet.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I think that's really important. That's absolutely 100% important to talk about. And I see that Devin has put, a question in the chat. And I think this is something that really came up a lot when we started thinking about this, right? Is administrators who were saying, but I don't have that many Black students in my school. Why should I create a Black student union? And so let's end with Devin's question here to you all. What do you you say? How do you, what are your suggestions on how a space with not a lot of Black students should be engaging in a Black student union?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many Black students you have in that school. Those Black students deserve to feel safe. They deserve a space for themselves. So you can have one, you can have a half, you can have 0.5. It doesn't matter. If that child identifies as Black, they deserve to have a space to be safe. And this is the school counselor talking. Like, everybody, regardless of who they are, deserves to have a safe space. So there.
I have
And I would like to.
Go ahead.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, Newton, go ahead, please.
I would like to add that if you don't have enough Black students, but there are students that would like to join the BSU, we should entertain that. We should become an all-inclusive group at that point, because some BSUs that I've noticed are mixed. They do have other cultures besides total African American, and I think that's great. I think that could also enhance our BSUs.
I just add, how better to counter that tricultural myth, the idea that the only, the major 3 ethnic groups or races in New Mexico are the white, the Native American, and Hispanic. The idea that BSUs help us to displace that and help us to recognize that Black culture has value in New Mexico. So even if there are only a few, and everything that Brennan and Dr. Newton, you said, I agree with, but just making sure we make space for it.
I want to highlight something that someone said in the chat. So Brian said spaces with fewer Black students may need it the most. They might feel the most isolated. Yes, that has very much been my experience in a suburban school, is that we talk a lot about Blackness in urban community, but in a suburban community, especially when we're dealing with gentrification and you have these students like moving from Austin to Round Rock, and they're used to having a more inclusive space, and they don't, that's super lonely. And then one thing I wanted to suggest in thinking about administrators who are struggling with how to respond, I think we've already covered that it doesn't matter how many Black students there are. This is really important, but it's important to also play an inside-outside strategy. That's how we won over and over again in Round Rock ISD, that as a teacher, I was inside, seeing and having eyes on the inside. And then I communicate with parents who had more cultural capital with my principal than I may have had as an employee. Like, hey, this is going on. Can you please schedule a meeting with the principal? Or, our principal needs a little bit of support that this is the right thing to do. Can you reach out? Because to be frank, like, white parents do that all the time and often get their way, and it's like the loudest voice gets heard. So we really developed a strong inside-outside strategy to where I could inform, hey, this is data. I mean, this is like publicly available data, but sometimes it's difficult to find. You need to take this and advocate for X, Y, Z. And so that's how we work together, and it's so important that we continue to work together in community.
And Devin, I just want to add real quick, I read your question as talking about African Americans, Black students, and parents who are in areas that there's not a lot of a community that looks like them. That's something that we have discussed a lot with Amy and the Black Education Act team. We are trying to come up with a way to reach those students and those parents so they don't feel so isolated and they can feel a part of the group. And this could be through virtual spaces, different things like that, but that's kind of the collaborative relationship with OAAA and PED, and what we're trying to work on to access those students so that they too can feel as though they're a part of a community that looks like them and have the supports that we're talking about tonight.
Absolutely. So as we end tonight, we are going to give you all notices for some events that are coming up. My team is going to start the slideshow so that you'll see all of the flyers for things that are happening with our education system, happening with our system, with our Juneteenth events, all of those things, right? And so it has been such an excellent opportunity for us tonight to engage in this one solution for Black students. We know this isn't the only solution, but we know that this is a very easy step that we can take. It's something that our students can be empowered to do on their own. It's something that we as community members and philanthropic community can contribute to. And it's something that we really want to continue the conversation with you all on. So we invite you to participate in what is going to be coming. We are definitely going to keep calling for collaborative action to increase BSUs in our New Mexico public schools. The Office of African American Affairs and the Public Education Department Black Education Act team are going to be working collaboratively to make sure that we have a virtual BSU space for those students who do not currently have BSUs and want to engage with us on how they can grow them. We didn't have this in space before, but as Tiffanie talked about, the Black Parent Association, I feel like we are doing it. Simone, I see you smiling, and so we are doing it, right? And we really want to create more spaces for our Black students to really engage in understanding and growing their own identity development and a sense of belonging in our schools. We appreciate each and every one of you for joining us this evening, and we look forward to working with you on moving this solution forward. So I want to invite all of you to join us for the upcoming sessions and participate. Please follow us on social media, get engaged with our newsletter if you aren't already. And then, you're always welcome to pop up over here at the African American Performing Arts Center and tell us what's going on with you and let us share what's going on with us. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to my community leader panelists. Thank you, Tiffanie, for coming and giving us such amazing, excellent information. And thank you to the Public Education Department Black Education Act team. We're so excited about the work that you all do and that you're going to keep doing. And we cannot wait to continue to move this solution forward. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Oh, AAA, this was absolutely amazing. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. This was really wonderful.
Yes. Tiffanie, I will be in touch with you tomorrow.
Okay, wonderful. I really look forward to it.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Take care, everyone.